You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and this is 6 Degrees of John Keel.
Hello and welcome to the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Barbara Fisher. Today I'm talking with Jason. He is the podcaster behind the Esoteric Book Club. Hello, Jason.
Hey, weirdos.
Hey, how's it going?
Going pretty good.
Well, great. So, fellow West Virginia weirdo, even though I'm an expatriate, I expatriated to Ohio, which isn't very far, but, you know... Whatever
it's the
happens.
Ohio Valley. It's okay.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in the extended Ohio Valley region. So when did you start being interested in the weirdness and the weirdos and the things?
Man, this is a great story. It goes all the way back to when I was a child. And as a child of the 80s, they had coloring books literally for everything. And one of the things was, cryptids and the paranormal, and I think actually UFOs was even one of them. And I remember seeing the Flatwoods Monster in there. And granted, the illustration for that was nothing like Braxy that we've got today, but it still piqued my interest.
Excellent. Yeah, I remember some of the UFO ones from the 80s, but by the time the 80s had rolled around, I was out of coloring books. And would, because I was in high school in the 80s, and I was doing like my own drawings and stuff. So, but I do remember seeing a UFO coloring book at the grocery store. So I'm with you on that.
In hindsight, the Flatwoods Monster illustration was just terrible. It talked about how they went up on the hill, and the illustration was like a pitcher's mound. And the illustration of Braxy was a hovering, like floating reptilian.
Oh. With
its tongue hanging out, but it was hovering like a Macy's Day float.
Oh.
Yeah, It was horrible.
No, that's terrible. That's yeah. I don't like that.
No, not at all.
I don't like that at all. And you're like the third person who said that their first big love was the Flatwoods Monster, and that just makes me so happy, because it's one of the weirdest sort of shaped and colored entity, creature, UFO thing, whatever it is, robot, UFO thing, hallucination.
Well, I think that's what makes it work.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so unique that you can't forget that image.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's I love that there were like these kids, and one of the moms went. How many times do you hear about moms climbing it? And the whole idea of a pitcher's mound. People have not been to Braxton County, the person who drew that, because those hills are big.
Oh, yeah. And steep. Very steep.
Super steep, but she went with the kids, and they took flashlights. She was ready, yeah. And but the fog, people tend to forget about the fog, the poisonous, bad smelling, whatever it was that made the dogs sick and the people sick. I love that story, and I think it's great that now we have little, people are making these drawings and figurines and plushies of the Flatwoods Monster, right along with Mothman, because, again, it's just an iconic image at this point.
One of the things that really blew my mind about the Flatwoods Monster specifically is, oddly enough, how much the Japanese are into it.
Yeah.
and I have no idea why. You can find toys with Braxy like scaled up to fight Godzilla,
Oh,
but
wow.
they are just obsessed with that creature for some reason.
Well, the way that our modern take on it has come, it kind of looks feminine because it has that pinched in quote unquote waist, whatever, trunk, whatever. And then it has the flared out part that looks kind of like a skirt. It kind of has a little bit of the Dalek to it. Like, that whole hovering exterminate thing, it has glowing eyes because of course it does. And then that pointy hood-like business on the top of the head. And it just has a compelling shape. And I think that that's part of why the Japanese, latch onto it, because that particular sort of female shape you can cutify, you can make it kawaii, or you can make it scary. And you can have that whole gamut of different shapes and sizes and everything. And it's really cool.
I think my favorite ones are the ones they have in the museum, and they're like these transparent, they almost look like gummy bears, but it's the Flatwoods Monster. They're about 3 to 4 inches tall, and their eyes are bugging out. They've got beady little eyes, and their mouths are open, and they have these peg-like teeth.
Oh, wow.
And it
like
reminds
that.
me almost of Simpsons.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when I went there to
With
the
those
festival.
teeth, yeah.
Yeah. A few years ago, I went to the Bigfoot Festival, which is in the same town, and I made sure to take a picture of every single one of those that they had in the display case.
That's amazing. I just, and it makes me happy because it's not like little towns in West Virginia have much reason for anybody to go there. Like, if you fly over West Virginia, I've told people this for decades, that there's parts of it that looks like there's no people at all.
Well, for the most part, parts of it
there are no people at all. Yeah. I was like, but there are towns down there in some of those places, but you're not going to know it unless you fly over it at night. And even then, there's probably not enough light to tell.
Oh, yeah.
Unless
And
you're
really,
coming in for a landing.
And really, there's places that are a no-fly zone, sort of like Green Bank Observatory.
Yeah.
They don't even have cell phones. Whoa, sorry about that. That was a computer making a noise there. That was weird.
I didn't actually hear it, so don't worry about it.
Oh, it was all in my headphones. Great.
Oh, more fun.
Yeah. But yeah, Green Bank, it's a no-fly zone, so you're not going to get any airplane noise, anything like that. You're not going to hear cell phones going off because it's a dead zone.
Yeah, it's a dead. Is what is the name of it? Not Green Bank, but the old hotel that used to have a bunker under it.
Greenbrier.
Yeah, Greenbrier. My brain just went, you don't need that thought. Goodbye. Time to go.
It's something, right?
Yeah, it's Greenbrier. It's the Greenbrier Hotel, and it does have a bunker under it that was at one time designated as a hidey hole for Congress in case of nuclear attack, because it's within driving or helicopter distance of Washington. So that was one of the places where they could run, and then they could, restart the government, quote unquote. Now they give tours of it. It was a big secret when I was growing up, except it wasn't, because everybody knew about it. I mean, West Virginians knew. I don't know if anybody else knew about it and just never asked us. But we knew about it because we all talked about it.
But it's kind of a funny story how that got revealed, too.
Oh, jump in.
So there was a maid who was working at the hotel who accidentally found this secret panel at one point. And I guess there was a protocol in place, set up and ready to go, where once it was discovered, they had to gather all the employees together, and they had a meeting. And someone rolled out one of those TVs on like the AV cart, and they had a VHS tape. And they plugged it in, and it revealed everything.
Wow.
Because once the secret was out, that was it.
Yeah. Well, now they have tours, now that everybody knows. How I cannot remember who it was. Oh yeah, it was one of my chefs in culinary school had gone to the Greenbrier to judge a culinary contest, and it was held there in the kitchens of the hotel, and he actually got to go on the tour, and
Nice.
he was very thrilled that he got to go. And I said, oh, yeah, the thing that, West Virginians knew about, but nobody else did, But I think at one time that was a no-fly zone as well. You couldn't fly over it unless you were in the government.
Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me.
So I don't know about that now. Because now that everybody knows where it is, they probably can't use it for that anymore. But
Not for the government, but it is still technically a fallout shelter, so it is functional.
yeah. Oh, yeah. It's actually really well put together and shielded and all of that. It's pretty interesting.
I got to go through on that tour when I was in grad school.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's really strange. It looks like the best way to describe it. Have you ever been in like the access corridors to a mall or something like that where it's just
Yeah.
concrete?
Yep.
That's all it is. It's just concrete walls, corridors, lots of pipes and cables overhead. It's dimly lit. It's got those stereotypical light bulbs hanging from a wire above.
Mm.
I got to see the broadcast room for like the
Oh,
president,
nice.
and it is surprising how fake that whole thing is.
Mm.
It's almost like just posters hanging up on the background on a concrete wall. And the clocks that you always see that have all the different time zones, it's literally just battery operated clocks hanging on the wall with a little handmade plaque underneath.
Wow.
It's really surprising how we see all these cinematic things on TV, and it's very superficial.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's wow. I love how you say, "Oh, it's fake. It's like the Truman Show," It's like, ooh. But the concrete corridors and the lights hanging, I'm like, yeah, no need to spice that up, guys. No need to make that look somewhat homey. No, because that's
No.
that's end of the world crap right there, and you don't need nice stuff for end of the world. You just
It's
just
not
be
like the
glad.
president of the free world is going to be staying there for extended periods of time.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I that's one of the West Virginia weirdnesses that I always loved, and it was always fun watching the X-Files with my husband, who
yeah.
was from Florida, and his whole family lived in Florida, and they were big X-Files fans too. So, every time one of the hidden places was in West Virginia, they'd ask, "Is that there? Is there one of those there? Is that?" And I'm like, okay, there are weird things in West Virginia. We have very quiet little offices for defense logistics, which is a branch of the intelligence agencies.
Mm-hmm.
We have like little tucked away places. We now have the FBI fingerprinting files in Fairmont, I want to say.
I think it's between Fairmont and Clarksburg.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's there. But there are small places, but do they look like that? No, because that's Vancouver. West Virginia doesn't look like Vancouver.
Yeah, I think the FBI Center went in after X-Files, though.
Yeah,
I
it
do
did.
remember they went to Wheeling at one point, I believe.
Yes.
And like you said, it's Vancouver because it was in a pine forest or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember watching that, getting all excited. I was like, oh, that is not Wheeling. They are not down in a flood zone or anything.
No, no. And then there was I think it was the first X-Files movie where part of it, or maybe it was the second one, but one of them took place in part of West Virginia, and it was this freaking prairie. And I'm like, there is no part of West Virginia there is no place that is that flat.
No.
There was nothing scraped by the glaciers there. Nothing was just flattened out, squished out. No. No. Couldn't you have at least put some matte paintings of, hills behind where you went? I mean, come on.
And it would have been so easy to do that because a lot of our hills are, they're at a distance, so it's still pretty faded and blurry and hard to see.
Yeah.
You just have to have this impression of hills in the background.
Yeah, but they didn't have any impressions of any hills. It was flat out flat, and I just laughed so hard.
I mean, who's going to know besides people from West Virginia?
Truly. And even people who've just driven through kind of aren't necessarily going to, remember that. They'll think, well, there's got to be some place here that's flat. No,
Yeah,
not really.
yeah.
I mean, river valleys, yes, but that's it.
Most people I know who drive through West Virginia have two comments. One is, man, these roads are really bad, followed by, man, these roads are really twisty.
Yeah. They go straight up and down, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what Tim Renner said once was, driving through West Virginia, he's like, I'm from hills in Pennsylvania. He's like, and we've got hills. He's like, but y'all do have mountains.
Oh, yeah.
He's like, there's actually, they don't look like the Rocky Mountains, but they're mountains, and they let you know. And I was like, oh, yeah. Have you done any exploration in the woods and the fields of the West Virginia, looking for anything strange on your own?
I mean, I'm not going out howling for Bigfoot or anything like that, but I do a good bit of just wilderness hiking, camping, stuff like that. It's actually part of my job.
Mm-hmm.
I am an outdoor educator besides having my podcast. So I take kids out in the woods and teach them to make observations and observe their surroundings, watch for animals, watch for signs. I taught a tracking class this past winter.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that does sound awesome. And it's not like the way, I got taught when I was a kid, which is, hey, it's the woods, go in there, play. Don't go too far. Stay within hollering distance. Take the dogs. There you go.
Yeah, pretty much.
And if something rattles at you, don't touch it.
Right. Yeah.
It's like,
luckily where I'm at, I'm not at the elevation for rattlesnakes, but we still have to watch out anyway.
Yeah.
Which, man, snakes it's been wild this year. I have seen way more snakes this summer than I have in the past few years combined.
That is interesting. And you're not the first person I've heard say it. I lots of people in the Appalachian region has been like, what is it with the snakes?
I'm wondering if the mild winter didn't have something to do with it.
I was wondering that too, because that was the explanation that I've jumped on with. And it's possible that there's plenty of food for them also because of the mild winter. So, there's more toads and, rats and, you know.
I was actually just
squirrels.
commenting on this to the children the other day when we were out in the woods. We've got a section of the property that has a bunch of hickory trees on it. And there are so many little sapling hickories coming up because the animals just didn't need to dig up their caches over the winter.
Yeah. Yeah. Same around my house and the oak babies.
Oh, yeah.
We have lots and lots of chipmunks around, where I live in Athens.
Mm-hmm.
Which is right next to the woods. We have woods that literally just wind all through the town, like everywhere.
Nice.
So we have these green corridors that all of the wildlife, use to traverse through town. And that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
But we have all these chipmunks, and usually they bury their food, and the squirrels bury everything, and then they dig it up. But this year I have so many baby oaks coming up in my garden that, because that's where they plant them. And usually in the spring, I get a few of them. and I just pull them up and toss them over the fence into the woods and go, hey, if that taproot hits the dirt, there you go. You can go. It'll be great.
Yeah.
But this year it was like 30 or 40 of them, and I have a small garden. So I was like, damn. So I'm like, those little chipmunks must have been planting all of those and then didn't have to eat any of them.
Yeah. And I suspect we may be seeing signs of the opposite for this winter. There's a lot of fruit germinating on the trees. And there's a lot of acorns that have already started turning green and falling. I'm seeing a lot of indications that it might be, if not a bad winter, it might be early.
That could be. And at this point, there's very little ability to predict anything having to do with weather.
Oh, yeah.
But I do remember that last year in the fall here, usually the squirrels and the chipmunks go absolutely crazy with gathering things, and they'll fight over nuts and have these, all but pitched battles on a field over it. And they'll run in front of your cars to get, black walnuts and whatever. And they didn't do that last year. They didn't argue with each other over anything. They didn't go completely insane and grab everything to be buried, diving in front of cars, risking their lives. They didn't do any of that. And then it turned out we had snow 2, maybe 3 times, and it was negligible as far as sticking on the ground. And this year we have so many ticks because of that.
Yes. Yeah, they are terrible here too.
Yeah. I've almost petitioned the mayor to say, hey, can we have guinea fowl, please?
If they weren't so noisy, yes.
I want an entourage of them for every time I go outside. I'll figure out a way to put harnesses on them, and, they can walk with me, and they can eat every tick that is near me. I hate ticks, but they're not into it, so.
Well, let's put a possum on a leash for you.
I would love that.
Yeah,
I'm
fairly certain they eat ticks, but I know they're immune to rabies and all kinds of diseases.
Yeah, Lyme disease doesn't even get them.
Yeah.
I'm one of the people who thinks they're cute. Most people don't, but I do. Our family are possum people. We like possums.
I don't mind them until they hiss at me.
Well, they're scary, but they really can't do anything. They can just look scary and sound scary, and then they can't really do much to back that up. They're not like cats that way,
No.
Bobcats, they hiss and yell, and it's like, okay, I'm done. Sorry, my bad. I'm gonna back away slowly. So, have you run across anything weird in the woods besides hissing possums?
I've run across a bunch of just weird stuff throughout my entire life. I'm sure Vuk has told you the Bigfoot story, or at least that I have a Bigfoot story.
He said you had one. That's all he said. He's very helpful this way. He's my intelligence gathering arm of my organization, and I need to pay him more because, he'll say things like, oh, he saw a Bigfoot, and boom, that's it. So, okay.
Yeah. Well, I also alluded to it in the chat that we had going, and I honestly, at this point, I don't even recall what year it was. It was, I'd say, early 2000s, based on where I was living at the time and all that. Mm-hmm. And it was during hunting season, and specifically rifle season. Mm-hmm. And I was on a power line on a hillside. So I was at the top of the hill looking down, watching for deer crossing. Mm-hmm. And the people I was with, they were doing a deer drive, walking through the woods in the direction of the power line, trying to push them towards me. Absolutely nothing came out. But at some point, I did see a figure standing on the wood line, kind of hidden in the shadows. Now, it's rifle season, so you have to have a certain amount of blaze orange on so that you don't get shot, right? Mm-hmm. This thing was solid black. And I'm not talking black clothing. I'm talking the entire face, everything was shrouded in black.
Mm.
And this was around dusk. And I sat there, and it was far enough away that I could see that it was clearly a figure. And I ended up looking through the scope of my rifle to see what it possibly was. And I couldn't make out any real details. And I just sat there watching it for so long. And this thing was just motionless. I feel like it was just watching me as much as I was watching it.
Yeah.
And at some point, it just turned and walked right back into the woods. I've had a lot of people suggest that it was a black bear, which, yes, there are black bear in this area. But if you ever see a black bear standing on its hind legs,
They don't do it for that long.
well, they don't do that for that long. Yeah, they don't do it for that long. But they also can't really pivot.
No,
They
they
can't
don't
do
have
a
this.
180.
They don't have the swivel.
No, their
that-
hips don't allow it.
No. Yeah. Their construction is not meant for standing upright. It's
No.
it's okay to stand upright for a little bit, but it doesn't walk upright all the time the way humanoids do. It's a bear. It's meant to be able to pop up and look around and then, go back down and run fast.
Right.
Yeah, and it does not have the hippie swivel capability at all.
Yeah, and when everyone else showed up to pick me up to drive me back home, they said, "Oh, did you see anything?" "Nope. Time to go. Let's get out of here."
There was not any deer. No, it's time to leave.
I did not talk about it for probably 3 to 4 years. I did not tell anybody.
I believe that for sure. For sure. I've heard enough people with their sightings that they're just like, no.
I feel like that was a really big turning point for me because even leading up to that, I would say, yeah, sure, I believe in Bigfoot. Yeah, he's probably out there somewhere. But then you see it, and it's just, there's that certainty that it's almost painful.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a shock to the system that, yeah, there it is. And
Yeah.
it's a confirmation that you can't really be prepared for until it happens.
Yeah. So why do you think he looked so featureless to you? Like you couldn't get detail through the scope.
Well, he was fairly far away, at probably about 100 yards, and my scope it's a good scope, but it's not, a telescopic scope.
Right. It's you're not a sniper.
No.
Okay.
But he was partially in shadows, first of all, and I'm saying he just because I again had no features. I have no clue what to base his possible gender on, but it was certain animals, their fur, when you get into any amount of shadow, it just turns black.
Mm-hmm.
And it absorbs light as much as anything else. And it seems like that may have been what was going on.
Yeah.
And if he's an animal and it was like, if this was a physical, tangible thing, it's going to have to be camouflaged in order to live in the woods without being detected.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a natural adaptation, I would assume.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of people who have seen them in the clearings for electrical lines.
Mm-hmm.
And that behavior of coming to the edge and stopping and watching I don't know how many stories I've read and heard where people say, and then it stopped, and then it stood there, and then it watched, and I felt like it was watching me.
And that's a typical behavior for any animal that's crossing a power line.
Oh yeah, yeah, especially if they're intelligent. And yeah, I do know that feeling of that sort of, I guess it's ontological shock. It's like you may know that there are quote unquote big hairy man things in the woods, but it's not the same as actually knowing.
Right.
It hits with a visceral, almost violent shock to the stomach. To me, it hits in the stomach.
Yep.
And then you get this kind of queasy feeling of, oh no. Oh, oh no. And I didn't have that with Bigfoot. I had it with the first time I saw a solid looking UFO. And then I had it again when I watched one of the little weird lights in the woods come up close, turn into a little fairy, and then fly away. I didn't like either of those. And that
are you talking about the red bird sighting when you were a child?
Yes, where my mom sees the bird and is like, "Oh, it's a bird," and I'm like looking at it, going, "No, I don't see no bird." And I couldn't talk to her for the longest time after the whole thing was over, and I just couldn't. For a little bit, even speak coherently. And, she just kept going on about the bird as we walked along. Where'd it go? I don't, And I was just like, it wasn't a bird.
It didn't go anywhere. There was no bird.
Yeah, I know. I said, well, why didn't you see the bird? I can't believe you didn't see the bird. It was bright red. Oh, well, I'm sorry, Ma. I didn't see it. I just didn't see it. But I have not seen Bigfoot, but I have heard something that we took to be Bigfoot and that sounded like Bigfoot recordings that were on the internet. So that was, I have to admit that I was briefly stupid and thought of walking into the woods toward it because I so wanted to see what was making that racket. But I didn't. My dog that I had gone out to, bring into the house because she was like, I don't know, her dog house was maybe 30 feet from the woods. And then whatever it was running back and forth and thrashing about and shaking, young trees and hollering and hooping and just sounding awful, was only like 30 feet past that.
Man.
And she was terrified. And this dog feared no animal. No animal. She didn't like people. She was afraid of people, except for my husband and I and Morgana. She was afraid of, all people. But animals like deer, horses, big dogs, coyotes, she didn't care. Snakes, she feared nothing like that. But whatever was out there, she was terrified by. She was having none of it. She wouldn't look toward it. She wouldn't even, like, when I started to step toward it with my hand on her collar after I had unlatched her, she just froze. She just refused to go toward the woods. And then I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. This is stupid. I have an X-Files special flashlight that's not working very well. And if you're that scared of it, then I should probably be scared of it too. So yeah, okay, let's go in the house then. The other dog wouldn't look at it either. And
wow.
Yeah, Ruehl was afraid of nothing. She loved everything. Except little tiny dogs. She didn't like them. But she loved people. She loved animals. And she just would keep her head turned and wouldn't look at it. And we heard it from inside. We were, waiting for the beans and rice I was making to be finished. And we heard this howl, and we both thought it was our dogs. And we were like, what are they howling at now? Because they were huskies. So, they would sing to the coyotes and stuff. And I was like, I bet the coyotes are out again. And, went outside and just stopped. And I was like, Zach, that's not coyotes. And he came out and he was like, what the hell is that? And, we stood on the porch listening and looked at Ruehl. That was the one that was, her doghouse was near the porch. And she just was not looking at it and not having it. But, and I was like, well, we should bring Nanin. That was the one closer to the woods.
Mm-hmm.
And Zach said, I'm not going to go get her. I said, I tell you what, go get the phone and go ahead and dial 911 and put your finger over the green button to make it dial. and I'll go get the dog. And so, I went slowly and quietly and, got close, found her hidden. She had hid herself behind the heat pump, between the heat pump and the house, in this little tiny narrow. Yeah, she was having none of him. She did not like it at all. She was terrified. And she was shaking. So, I get out there and I'm petting her and I'd pop my head up and look and try to see. And it was so close. I could literally watch the path of it running back and forth by the way the undergrowth and the young trees shook.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, and the feet, it was not a 4-footed cadence. It was a 2-footed cadence.
Mm-hmm.
And it was big. Whatever it was big. And the sound, that's what got Zach, the sound, because of course he's a musician and he was, recording music at the time. So he listened very carefully to the sound in between going, would you hurry up? Because I don't want to stand here anymore. He said that you could hear the resonance from a very big body. Like whatever made the sound had a very large chest to make that kind of resonance. And so, I did grab the dog and, ran back to the porch, and he grabbed the other dog and we all went in the house. And it still kept going for a while. And it got to the point where it was kind of like we just wanted to cover our ears. The dogs went into the basement. They were having none of this above ground where we can hear it thing. And when it stopped, we tried to eat dinner. We couldn't. So to hell with the beans and rice. We're done with that now. And we started looking up every animal that we could think of and their sounds and listening to sound files. And, I listened to black bears. I went ahead and listened to grizzly bears, even though I knew that we don't have those in Ohio. I listened to elk, and of course they have the silly whistling noise.
Mm-hmm.
I listened to white-tailed bucks, white-tailed does. I listened to wild boar. I listened to feral hogs. I mean, I just every damned thing I could think of. Cougars, even though we're not supposed to have them. I listened to lions, because I do know at that time crazy people kept, menageries in Ohio because it was legal to do so. So I started looking up African animals, looking at it. And then finally from upstairs, I can hear Zach's doing the same thing. And he had his monitor speakers from recording, and he found a sound file and played it, and it was the sound. And I was like, that's it. That's it, Zach. That's it. What is it? He said, Bigfoot. I just said, oh, F you. No, it isn't. Because of course I was thinking that when I was outside, but I was like, nah, you're just crazy. That's not what it is. And he said, nope, that's what it is. I'm like, it's a moose, right? It's a moose. Somebody had a moose. He's like, no, it's Bigfoot. And it was actually one of Matt Moneymaker's recordings from Ohio.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, it was Bigfoot then. Then I was like, okay, now I have to eat because I need something to ground myself.
Oh, yeah.
After that. Oh, God. And the worst part was, and the reason that I was like, it's not Bigfoot, was because a friend of mine and his wife had been visiting that evening, which is why we were eating dinner at like midnight, because, they hadn't left and they had already eaten. So we just, we were polite and didn't eat. But he had said something, now that we're all in West Virginia or in Ohio again, and we're all close to West Virginia, you and I and Tom will have to get together and go Bigfoot hunting. and go out into the woods. And he's like, I got a new camera. It's great. He's a videographer. He's like, and we can just go. And, Tom is like wilderness guy. So, we won't starve or anything. And I said, well, what am I going to be doing? And he's like, oh, you're just the bait,
Yeah.
because you're the weirdness magnet. So you just go along. And I was like, Then after he left, then all this noise started happening. And I was just like, my brain was like, it is not Bigfoot because he just talked about that. And that's not right.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to believe that we conjured that mess up. I don't, no. And so for years when I'd tell that story, I wouldn't tell that part of it.
I have
that
two
we had
questions
just
from
talked
this.
about it. Okay.
So what time of year was this?
It was early spring, enough that there was leaves, but they weren't super, super big, but there were leaves.
Okay. And a follow-up question, were there any major life events going on for you at this time?
It was fairly soon before I had a miscarriage. Yeah. Yeah, and I wondered that, like, it wasn't that long ago when I thought about it. I was like, when did the miscarriage happen? Was it before that or after that? And it turns out after I looked at dates and looked at calendars and, looked at journal entries, it was after that.
I don't really have any direction to go with that. It was just mostly, I remember hearing, it's a very Keelian thing to find out what else is going on. And I remember like Joshua Cutchin and Timothy Renner both are very big into asking about the expanded events around the singular happening.
Yeah.
And try to build an idea around that possibly.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, I remember talking with Tim about it years and years later. I think like last year. And I was like, Tim, does this mean I or my friend or all of us together conjured the Bigfoot? Or did the environment listen to what we said and then point the direction for the Bigfoot? It was like, all of it's woo. But I'm like, did we dream it up? Or, this is why I don't talk about going, hunting for Bigfoot very often, because I don't want this to happen again. Especially not here in town. That would be terrible.
Oh yeah. I think this is a situation that is sort of like improv, The answer is always yes and.
Yes. Yes. There is no yes, no. It's always, well, yes and or maybe. There's a lot of maybes. So many maybes. And that's basically what Tim said. He said, maybe you did conjure it. Maybe it was already out there. And the reason you all talked about it and it came out of your friend's mouth is because he kind of knew it was out there.
Right.
I was like, whatever it was. I did, call him the next day and tell him, don't ever talk about that at my house again. We can talk about it at your house and it can go to your house. Because I didn't like it at all. And I actually did call BFRO and report it. I was like, this is not a sighting, but this is something that sounds very much like it. And I actually talked with their investigator for about 45 minutes, and Zach talked with him. And Zach was like, what really kills me is I actually had my studio that looks out on those woods set up to record. He was like, I could have just flipped a couple switches and stuck a mic out the window. And he's like, I feel so terrible that I didn't do it, but I couldn't think.
Well, people ask me all the time, It's like it was hunting season. You had a rifle, you had a scope. Why didn't you shoot this thing? And I couldn't be sure.
Yeah, you could have shot a
You know?
person.
Exactly. It would be a absolutely suicidal person wearing solid black in hunting season, but like
Yeah.
if you can't see your target, I'm not going to shoot it.
No, you're not supposed. I mean, okay, people who actually hunt, who are ethical hunters,
Yes.
don't just shoot at whatever is moving.
Right,
It's just,
right.
it is not done.
But again, it was that shock factor too.
Yeah, it's like, what am I looking at?
Hmm.
The ontological, gut punch of what is that? But yeah, I can't imagine shooting at anything that's bipedal humanoid shaped. I mean,
No.
I can't. And there's lots of other hunters who basically said, I saw it, I had my gun trained on it, but I couldn't do it because it looked like a person.
It's too human.
Yeah.
It's very clearly not, but it's too close.
Yeah. And that to me is just a no. And then, there's the possibility that, okay, if you did shoot it and it, didn't do anything.
Oh yeah.
That, that's been reported by Stan Gordon and various other investigators for decades. That people shoot at it and they're sure they hit it, but nothing happens.
And this was not very far from the Chestnut Ridge.
Yeah.
This was maybe 30, 45-minute drive from Chestnut Ridge. So we're in the same area that all of that took place.
Yeah.
In fact, now that I think about it, Kevin Paul is working on his third book. And he actually, I sent this report to him because it's not in Greene County, but it's on the border.
Right.
And in his second book, he had a report that was very similar. It wasn't a power line, though. It was a right-of-way for a gas line.
Yeah. Yeah. All of those places are, there's so many episodes of Strange Familiars where people are out and they, cross one of those places, or they're up at the top of a ridge looking down through the opening, and there's, some two-legged something or another, whatever it is, lurking, watching them.
This honestly makes me wonder about their eyesight, because they very clearly are avoiding us, but they do it from such a distance that, I don't know, maybe we just stand out that much, but, clearly humans do not belong in the woods. But yeah, they're at a distance. They usually have a clear line of sight if they're crossing these woodcuts or power lines.
Or even crossing a road.
Oh yeah.
And trees on one side, trees on the other, hanging over, so yeah. And I think that's part of why there's so many descriptions of them walking across the road and looking over their shoulder towards the traffic, as they go across, because, well, it's a clear line of sight.
Well, that would also help avoid blinding by headlights.
Yeah.
So if they have like hypersensitive eyesight, headlights could potentially blind them entirely. So if they look over their shoulder, they're really only getting indirect light.
Right. Yeah. And I do wonder about that, because if their eyesight is really good for night vision, then even a high-powered flashlight would be bad, for them to. My crappy X-Files style flashlight did not cause any problem because it was, about to die. It's like, okay, so now we know we have to keep fresh batteries in the flashlight at all times. So, oops.
Well, we know those batteries end up in the TV remote anyway.
Yeah. And most of the time, I've also heard of people whose batteries have been, sucked dry by something or another when they most need to be used. So who knows?
I've run into that too, and it's not during anything paranormal. It's just fresh batteries. You go to use it, and they just immediately die.
Yeah.
And it's made me wonder, like, what is going on around me? Because I've stopped and looked around the woods when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, okay,
Yeah, where is he? He's out there
what
somewhere.
happened? Yeah. And it's interesting. I've been thinking this for a while, but I've never really, articulated it. But, all of the Bigfoot sightings that are in the right of ways, or especially with the big power lines, there's a lot of UFO sightings in those
Mhm.
places. The UFOs liked to hover under or over the power lines and
Yep.
travel along them. And I mean, my grandfather was of the opinion that they were sucking electricity out. And he was not, I mean, he was an atheist. He, he was not formally educated. He educated himself. So he was always reading, like, encyclopedias and stuff.
hmm
And when he would see things hovering over the power lines, and he said, it had an orange glow. It was like a sphere that was orange. And he said, and it hovered over there and it started to glow brighter over the power lines. And, he had no reason to make stuff like that up. And in fact, he's the person who taught me how to tell an airplane and a satellite from anything wonky. He's like, you see, satellites, they go straight. They just go straight. They don't like disappear. They don't like zigzag. He's like, and planes pretty much travel straight too.
Yeah, but they have flashing lights most of the time.
Yep.
They change color based on perspective.
Yep. And he said the FAA lights are these here, blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
And then we'd watch, and, a couple hours go by and something goes zigzagging along. He's like, see that? That's one of those. I said, so what do you think they are? He's like, I don't know. I just call them or those.
Well, let me throw this out there to you. What if they're not sucking the power, but they are generated by the electromagnetism that's generated from these high tension power lines?
Okay. And my feeling is you could be correct, but you have to have a human there to
Exactly.
observe it and help it come into being, I guess.
Yeah.
To
So-
co-create it or something.
I've had this pet theory that I've been tossing around for probably 5 to 10 years at this point. And until recently, I couldn't really get too much information on it. Have you ever heard of telluric currents?
Are those the underground currents?
Yes, the
Yeah.
geomagnetic currents.
Yeah.
So for the longest time, the U.S. Geological Survey has done studies on this. There was a map that you could actually look at and see the lines, but it hadn't been done. I hadn't seen an update since like the 60s, right?
No, it hasn't been updated for a long time. Yeah.
Oh, I have news for you.
Is it updated now?
It's updated now.
Good.
I actually went to look for it in preparation for this show, and it almost looks like a weather model. So it's got that color gradation based on the variances. And I'll tell you, West Virginia is like beyond red.
Yep.
It's up into like the pink, almost white color because it is such a high variance in electromagnetism.
Yeah.
And this isn't the geomagnetism. This is in the atmosphere above the state.
Right.
So it's like everywhere around us.
Yeah.
And
And
where
you
I'm
know
at
what
in
ain't all
Morgantown-
it ain't all cell towers, because
No. No.
you don't need cell towers where nobody lives.
Yeah, that's true.
You don't need all the cell towers in the world.
Yeah, and even based on the original maps, and I had this theory based on just weird stuff that was happening in Mon County where I live. And even on the old maps, you could see where there were multiple lines that were overlapping over the county.
Hmm.
And now I look at the new updated map and it's just solid white. It is
Wow.
bizarre.
That is interesting, and that is bizarre.
And you can actually see it follow the shape of the mountain range.
Oh,
Yeah.
that is interesting.
I'll send you a link to it after we get off here.
Yeah, definitely, because I'm going to send it right on to Chris and go, Chris, plug that into your map thing.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
And then we'll look at, West Virginia sightings and that. We'll put them together and see what happens.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I believe parts of Ohio are pretty far up there, too.
Yeah. Yeah, it is also a weird place here. There's all kinds of strange stuff. Like there are sightings of spherical balls of light going into and out of Lake Erie, for example.
Oh, yeah.
And that's been going on for a long time. I even have an uncle who, basically was sitting out on his dike. That sounds weird, but the Army Corps of Engineers built a dike around the lake so that they could build houses right next to the lake without the lake, deciding to kill everybody and flood them out. So it's just a big old pile of rocks that just extends around chunks of Lake Erie.
Okay.
And it's about, I want to say 40 feet high, something like that. So when you get those big waves, when there's storms and stuff, it doesn't destroy the houses. And so he had a house that was right, you go out in the backyard, which was this flat patch of sand and crappy grass. And then you went up the steps to the top of the dike and there was the lake. Boom, right there. And you could watch all kinds of stuff. And he did. And he had a sailboat and he fished and did all this stuff. And he saw a few weird balls of light either pop up out of the lake or most of the time it was go down in the lake. So, yeah.
This reminds me of something I read in grad school. I had a book. It was the Encyclopedia of North American or Native American Mythology, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And the entries were not expansive, and they didn't really have a lot of cross-referencing options or anything like that. But there was something called a meteor fire dragon that supposedly was an Algonquin story around the Great Lakes.
Ah.
And it was a blazing light with a fiery tail that would go into the lakes. And the story was that these lights, or the dragons, I guess, or whatever term they actually used, because clearly that wasn't going to be dragon, they lived under the waves to prevent them from fully combusting and burning up.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I'm trying to remember if the Shawnee people were one of the Algonquin language groups. I think they were. But they have a creature that is the most powerful creature in their spirit stories, and it's a water panther.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I wonder if it's related. So, because, the dragon, that sounds like, white people wrote it down and said, well, we don't know what to call it. We're going to call it a dragon.
Well, it's a flying serpent, so clearly it's a dragon.
Yeah. But,
Yeah,
that's
I think the water
interesting.
panther is based on a similar mythos. Because I believe it could fly, and it was a horned panther from what I remember.
Yes. And
Which
it lived in the rivers.
I always wonder about that because I picture, like, what did the horns look like? Because there weren't really animals around that had horns in the way that we think of with cow horns. There were buffalo, and if you go far enough west into Ohio, yeah, you probably would have run into them.
There were forest buffalo here.
Okay.
We have a ghost buffalo here in Athens, right outside of city limits. That was the last forest buffalo, and it was shot in. This is interesting. He actually had federal army guards, who were stationed 24 hours a day to keep watch on him, and somebody was asleep at the post, or was taking care of natural business. I don't know, but somebody, a poacher, came in and shot him.
Oh man, that's sad.
Yeah, yeah. But there's a street here in Athens that's original name was Buffalo Trace because that's where the buffalo would travel from
Mm,
the hills and the forest down to the river and back. So they made a street out of it.
nice.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of the roads here where I live, the roads are terrible because they're so narrow. Well, it
Oh,
turns out they're all still the old wagon train roads.
yeah.
So these have not changed in, 300 years.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's so many dirt roads around Appalachia, but particularly most of my experiences in West Virginia, and yeah, they're still the old,
Hmm.
settler trails and stuff like that. And
Oh,
even
these are the roads in town.
that's even
Like these are
better.
the original roads that were laid out during the founding, and they have not changed at all except to have brick laid down and eventually they were paved.
Yeah, that's true. There's a paved road in Putnam County, Route 35, and
Hmm.
you can tell that it was originally, a just a wagon track, and it still falls apart, and there's parts that just slide down the hill, and they keep fixing it, and they keep putting up guardrails, and it keeps sliding down the hill. So yeah,
Yeah, and it's like every couple of years you look and it's like, oh, the brick is coming up, time to repave.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Appalachian roads, boy, we could do a whole show about that. There's some fun stuff in Appalachia that, whoo,
Well, there's so much that is based on roads and railways and travel. You got crossroads, you've got all the tunnels, you've got the covered
hmm
bridges, all the water crossings. There's all kinds of directions you could go with that.
oh yeah, and then there's the abandoned mines. Those are always
Yes,
fun.
yes.
Those are great.
There was a mine on the property where I grew up as a child, and there were some weird things on the property, but I never had any incidents with the mine itself.
Hmm.
Granted, I wasn't supposed to be in the mine, but there were fossils in the shale, so I had to go in a little bit just to get
Just
fossils,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, I
just deep enough
understand.
to avoid the bats, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I understand that. If I had been a kid, I would have done the same thing because, well, why not?
Yeah, and the fossils were beautiful. They were fern fossils, and
Ooh,
it was the really dark black ones that stand out, and they have so much detail against
yeah,
the gray of the slate, but they
yeah,
were so brittle,
yeah,
so incredibly brittle.
yeah, yeah. Shale is delicate, and yeah, I always used to find. I was always distraught because I never found arrowheads at my
Right.
grandparents' farm, but I always found fossils. And it was in part of the state that was underwater, that was an ocean at one point. So I was always
Ah.
finding, little spiral shells and trilobite bits and things, and
Oh, okay. So I roughly know where you were then.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the whole arrowhead thing always disappointed me too. Like I know in town there was, I think it's still called Indian Park. It's a little tiny, tiny park,
Hmm.
and it was either an area where they did the flint knapping or there was a cache there because people my parents' age used to go there in the 60s and 70s as kids, and they could just take a trowel, stick it in the ground, and come up with an arrowhead.
Oh,
And it was a
yeah,
tiny, tiny area, no bigger than, I don't know, maybe 20 by 20,
yeah,
20 feet. So
yeah.
it's small. And then to the north of us, we had the Warrior Trail and what was the other one? It's the Warrior Trail, if I remember, goes east to west from Ohio to Seneca Trail,
Oh,
which
yeah,
goes north south.
right. Yeah, I do know that one. I remember that from West Virginia history, all of those many years ago.
Yeah, and we were close enough that from the hill where I lived, I could look over to the next ridge and say, okay, the trail is right over there.
That's awesome.
But never found arrowheads, didn't really find any artifacts.
Hmm.
Most of what I found was maybe at best early 1800s pennies,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
still pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's really awesome. Yeah. The only person that ever found like something truly, truly old, and it wasn't in a place that it should have been there. So my guess would be that somebody had brought it there. But my dad went under the foundation of the house I grew up in for the first 9 years of my life, and it had been busted up into apartments. So he was in the crawl space under the house, and he found a scraper.
Oh, wow.
That is it looks like granite, honestly. It doesn't look like flint. It doesn't have that glass like sharp edge.
Right.
But it very, very definitely was held in a hand. It could have been a hand axe too.
Okay.
But it's gorgeous, and he found it, and he pulled it out, and he's like, "Look what I found!" And I really hope that he does give it to the Cultural Center in Charleston at some point, because it's really old and really cool. But how he found it and like, just sort of laying there.
Oh yeah.
Is weird. I mean, the dirt had been dug about at some point, and his theory is that a kid found it and was playing with it and took it under there where their parents didn't know that, they were under there playing in the dirt at some point before, we lived there.
I mean, it could have even been a groundhog just tossing around dirt.
Well, that's true. It could have come out of a tunnel from, a digging animal who was like, what is this boulder doing in here? Get out.
Yeah. And it could still be a scraper, even though it's not flint, because from my understanding, once you get into the southern part of West Virginia, there was no easy access to knappable material, but there was a stone available that they could grind. And some of the artifacts, especially from like the early Adena and Hopewell periods, there are these stone artifacts that are ground stone rather than copper or flint.
Neat. Yeah, because Ohio has flint all over the place.
Right, right.
But there's I still haven't found an arrowhead in our river, but I have found pieces of flint that that were worked. And then there was that weird rock that just showed up in our house, and we still don't know how that happened. But
okay, I got to hear that story.
Okay, so we were watching television, and the kid Fox, how old was he at that point? I want to say 13, because that's about the right age for the sense of humor. He walks to go to the bathroom, which is like right next door. So you just have to walk out into the hallway and boom, turn, and then you're in the bathroom. And right in the middle of the hallway is a rock, and it's rounded looking. And he was like, oh, where'd that come from? And he picks it up and he's like, hey, Ma, I found a rock. And I'm like, you're always finding rocks. Because I always have to go through his pockets and make sure there are no rocks before I wash the clothes, which, hey, that's fine, because my grandmother and my mother said, I hope you someday have a child that keeps rocks and crap in their pockets. So, yeah,
so
that's
the
why
Appalachian
it happened.
curse. You're going to have a kid that's just like you.
Yep. I had two, and that's just how it is. So I was like, he was like, no, it's right here in the center of the hallway. And I was like, oh. So, I got up and looked at it, and it's weird. It's carved funny.
Huh.
But I don't know if it's carved. And so it's a triangle, a rounded triangle, round
weird.
On the back. And then there's a carved bit, or maybe, I can't tell, it's smooth. So maybe it was carved at one time and then left in water, and that smoothed it. But he said, it looks like a coochie, Mom. And it does. It looks like a vulval mound, like from the front.
Huh.
Like, really looks like, I mean, the people I've shown it to have gone, yeah, that's a Gucci. And so its name permanently in our house is Coochie Rock. But I couldn't believe it. I was just like, what the hell? Why is it here? We tried to come up with this. So I showed it to Morgana. I'm like, Morgana, did you bring this in the house and just leave it somewhere and then not tell me? And she's like, nope. I'm like, you don't remember this? And she's like, nope. Zach, did you? He's like, no. He's like, and then the kids said, well, maybe it was stuck in the paw pads of one of the dogs, but none of the dogs were big enough to have paw pads that would encompass something that big.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's one of the 3 rocks that have shown up in my house.
And I'm guessing you don't wear shoes indoors.
No.
And one follow-up question. Was it warm when it was found?
Yeah, that's the first thing Josh Cutchin asked me. And it didn't seem to be. It seemed to be ambient room temperature.
Okay.
Yeah, no. I have recently heard something fall from what appeared to be the ceiling of my kitchen. It was a shard of glass. And I had a cat in there with me because, he was helping me make coffee and was, begging for milk. And I was like, no. But he watched it fall. I watched his head, go down. And then he sort of dove after whatever went chink on the tile.
Yeah.
And so I leaned over and I grabbed it, and it was a shard of glass, and that one was warm.
And yet nothing was broken.
No.
Yeah, see, that definitely sounds like an apport.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've had the opposite. I've had things completely disappear when I drop them. Several times, actually.
Oh, yeah, that's always a thing. And I've had that happen too. And that's a thing. And I don't like it.
No.
Because it seems like, all right, who's down there? Who grabbed it?
Yeah.
Why did you want that?
The one that really stands out in my mind is, well, I have 2 that stand out. The first one is so I used to do leather working. I was into reenacting. I did historical reenactment in grad school because I was a history major. It all went together. So I did a lot of leather work and sewing to create my costume. And one day I dropped this really big leather needle. It's called a lover's needle.
Yeah, those are huge.
The triangular tip to pierce the leather, right?
Yep.
And I dropped it on a tile floor. And that is definitely not something you want to lose, because if you step on that, you're going to have an enormous hole in your foot.
And you're going to have to go to the ER, because that one you can't just... Yeah, that's bad.
Well, it bounced once. I heard the sound, and that was it.
Oh.
And never found it.
Hardwood floor?
It was a wood look laminate.
Oh, that's even worse, because it doesn't really have the cracks that, it could have fallen into in an old hardwood floor where, they shrink. The planks
I swept that floor 2-3 times with a broom and never found it. To this day, it's never shown up.
Somebody was making shoes somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's one of those just, okay, whatever happens.
And the other one, it was, I was working at a metaphysical shop. I forget what exactly I was bagging up, but I was putting like stones it was something into little baggies for sale. And I went to put this one in a bag, totally missed the bag somehow. I heard it again. It bounced one time on the carpet and vanished.
Somebody wanted that rock.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the shop owner said too. She's like, "Well, it's theirs now.
Yeah,
don't question it."
Yeah, it's like don't get too into trying to find that. That's I've lost so many pieces of jewelry that way. So I have to be careful and like bribe the little critters and it's like, okay, now Have some things to eat. Here, have things to eat. Have this rock over here that I bought it at the rock shop special for you. Please don't steal my stuff. But yeah, I've had a ring drop off my finger onto a hardwood floor and disappear.
Oh.
And then it appeared at a friend's house. She was going up into her sewing room, and it was right in the middle of the floor. And she knew it had to have been mine because, well, it looked like something that would be mine. And she called, and she's like, did you leave a ring here at my house? And I'm like, no. All the rings that I had when I last was there are still here. And she's like, oh. Well, there's this ring, and she described it, and I went, that's the one that fell off my finger and was nowhere to be found in the bedroom.
That is so bizarre.
So, yeah, who knows what that is. There's a whole book called Just One of Those Things.
Yeah, the Jots.
Yeah, Jots. And the stories in that book, man, like, you know, a letter falling from the sky and landing on a person's lap. You know, people think that cannot possibly happen, and then, you know, weird stuff happens.
I think one of my favorite stories out of that book is when they cracked open a piece of coal and a toad jumped out, took a few hops, and then just died.
Yep. I remember reading that. I don't think it's in a Keel book, but somebody, one of the older authors, wrote about it. It might have been Charles Berlitz, maybe.
Oh, it could be Fort.
It could have been, and it could have been Charles Fort. That's the other person it could have been. But yeah, I read that as a kid and was like, whoa.
First time I read that, I was just like, what the heck? And that was the whole story. Like, there's nothing else around. It's just that short little blurb, and it's just like, what the hell?
Yeah.
What?
Did somebody do an autopsy on that little toad?
Right?
You know?
Where's the toad? We need that toad.
Yeah, I was like, did it dry up? Did it shrivel up? I mean, what happened?
Yeah.
I have questions about this. I have many questions.
Why didn't you fill that in? How big was it?
Yeah, what species? What kind? You know, was it a... And then there's the somebody found what looks like a spark plug in coal.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that's messed up.
So that one, I know they said it was metal, or partially metal, part looks ceramic. Now that one, it could also be a fossil, and it would be weird to have like a crinoid fossil in coal or shale.
Yeah.
But it's possible to have a fossil that has very strong iron elements. So like the ones we have here where I live, we've actually just been finding a bunch of petrified wood in a creek near an old coal mine. And it is super heavy. It's orange. It's got a lot of iron ore in the fossil itself. It's not metallic and it's not magnetized, but I could almost see like a tree branch or a stem or something like that with an extended core made of mostly iron that could look like an old spark plug.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. I like that.
Yeah, it's fun because the kids, they go out and they play in the creek and they just show up and they're like, hey, what's this? Well, that is a piece of wood that's older than dinosaurs. Whoa.
Yeah, that's exciting. That is exciting to kids. Yeah, I think more kids need to play in creeks these days. I just do. That was my great joy growing up, is playing in the ponds and playing in creeks and finding all kinds of treasures.
I remember because we lived on a farm in the middle of nowhere, we had to have deliveries of limestone gravel for the road, right?
Yeah.
I remember as a kid learning how to do a paleontological excavation because I had found a fossil in the gravel.
Oh,
so
awesome.
I set up a rope grid across the road, blocking off this whole area of study. And then my dad comes home from work and he can't get through.
I was like, what is this?
Yeah. So try explaining to a 5 or 6-year-old that, hey, we need to move these ropes so I can get through, but no, you'll run over the excavation site. Well,
Okay, I hate to tell you this, kid, but it's already messed up.
yeah.
It's done been messed up, 100 miles from here, because
Yeah.
that's where these rocks came from. Yeah, Morgana is amazing. She has this amazing ability to just look down and find a treasure. Like,
Oh, wow.
it's the weirdest thing. We go on vacation and we get to the place we're staying, and she gets out of the car, and there's big, chunky, rounded gravel
Mhm.
that's basically being used as mulch in a partition of the parking lot. And there's a tree growing in the middle of it. And she walks over there and glances down and pops up with a fossil.
Nice.
Just boop, boop, there. I was with her and Fox and one of Fox's friends, and we were digging around in the Hocking River. And there's a big gravel bed that is one of the places where, stuff gets deposited from being pushed and rolled by the river.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, silt and stuff gets stirred up and then laid there. So you get all kinds of neat old stuff. And the kid looked down and popped up with an old medicine bottle.
Nice.
And I was just like, see, there you go. You're always doing that. You're just always doing that. And yeah, we found some really cool treasures for Chad and Tim to send home with them when Tim visited. It was like, hey, this came out of the river, and this is a piece of a brick that's from the old asylum on the hill. And yeah, Tim didn't want that one. He was like, nope, you can keep that one, Chad.
What? You don't want the haunted brick? Why not?
I know, right?
Make brick dust out of it. I'm sure that would work for something.
Yeah, I can think of quite a few things it would probably work for. But yeah, so she just has this ability to just look down. Oh, look, there's a river oyster shell, and it's still got its hinge. And oh, look, a crow feather. Oh, look.
Yeah.
Whatever. She's always finding stuff.
That reminds me, the other day I had this weird knowing, I guess is the way to describe this. I was visiting my parents, and I went to open the door to the basement, and I'm reaching for the handle, and in my head I get this idea. It says there's going to be a snake on the other side. So I pause for a moment, and I'm like, okay, that's weird. Open the door, and I'm looking, because now, at this point now I'm careful. I want to make sure there's no snake there. And I don't see anything except a little tiny piece of paracord. I was like, okay, my dad was just moving stuff around and he dropped it and no big deal. Well, it turns out it was a little ribbon snake.
Aw.
Little tiny thing. But it's
Cute
just one of
little
those
guy.
weird things. It's like almost a statement from the snake itself.
Yeah.
As it saw me approaching, it was like, hey, I'm here. Don't
Yeah.
step on me.
Yeah. Like,
And it
totally, don't tread on me, dude. Like,
Yeah.
no. You know?
And I told my parents about it, and my dad's like, "Oh, hey, that's cool. There was it was a ringneck. I'm sorry, not a ribbon snake. It was a
Okay.
ringneck racer. Apparently, there was a fairly large one under the porch, and it had babies.
Aw. And
So
so
this was one of the babies.
that's so awesome. Yeah, I like harmless snakes. I'm not as fond of rattlers and
No,
copperheads, even though copperheads you can usually just kind of go along, do your snaky thing over there. I'm not going to mess with you. Rattlers can get kind of testy though.
yeah, that's why I'm never upset when I see a black rat snake, no matter how big it is. It's like these things, they eat the venomous ones, so
Yep.
it's okay.
Yep. That's exactly how I feel about them. Now, they'll still make me jump and possibly make a squeak like a little girl because they're so big and they're moving, And for a second, it's like, oh, my God. And
It's like, yeah,
this is why I'm never going to Australia because, they've got too many things there that are too scary. And no.
Yeah, they have birds there that want to kill you, so I'll pass.
They have birds. They have hunting spiders that kill birds, and they have all the poisonous snakes in the world, and ugh.
Saltwater
No.
crocodiles.
Yep. They got
No, thank you.
crocs. They got all these big great white sharks. No. There's just too much no.
Oh, and the box jellyfish.
Oh, I forgot about those. Those are terrible too. There's just so many scorpions. No.
And then you jump over to New Zealand and there's nothing.
I know. Weird. Very weird. It's probably they sent everything over to Australia. Just give it to them. Just we don't want no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was doing genealogy and I saw that one of my family members first off, I have family on my mother's side that's named their last name is Snape. And I was like, well, that's just okay. Moving along. And I also saw that two of this woman's sons, one went to jail and the other went to Australia. I was like, so no, not only do they have the last name Snape, but criminal activity was occurring. I'm like, yeah, leave it to my family. Because they got to be dishonorable in some way or something. And I was like, so somebody did make it to Australia. Now I wonder, did they get there and get eaten by a bird or a snake or a shark?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, our family just does not have great luck. So what?
Well, I wouldn't be too concerned about them being criminals because at that time they were sending everybody to Australia that they could.
Oh, I know. It was a debt thing.
Yeah,
The one who went to jail was actually a thief of some sort or another.
Yeah, but the tax thing, they usually shipped people out.
Yeah. Yeah. The other one was a debtor. So let's not build debtors' prisons. We'll just give them to Australia.
Well, could you imagine that? Like your brother, say, like murdered someone and he goes to jail. You missed a payment on your taxes and they're shipping you halfway across the world. It's like, how is this fair?
Yeah, and that's a hell of a way to colonize something too. I mean, you have a colony and you want to colonize it in a colonize-y kind of way, not I'm just going to send the flotsam and jetsam and just, I'm just done with them. They can't live
ground.
Here. Yeah. And it's not like there weren't people already there. Thank you. Thank you. It's like, do we have to? Can we not? Okay. Guess not. But yeah, I read that and was like, well, I guess Australia has some of my people there. I wonder if they turned out well, but who knows? What kind of have you had any other strange, happenings around you? I really love the snake telling you, dude, don't step on me.
Yeah, and that was a recent one too. I have all kinds of weird stuff. If I told all of them, we'd be here another 2 or 3 hours.
Well, we can't do that, but you can always come back.
Yeah. I know you're looking into strange light phenomena.
Yes.
So I have something that I was going to tell you anyway, so might as well do it on the podcast.
Excellent.
This was, and I can tell you exactly where it was, what year it happened. It was at night. It was at an old Boy Scout camp. And I was there with a club from high school, and we were having a camp out there. And we were walking up this old gravel road that looks over a field. And on the far side of the field, there is a tree line that's on a slight hillside, right? And it's not super steep, but it's enough that you can see above the fence line by the road to see the wood line.
Mm-hmm.
And we're walking back, and it's night. It's a full moon and everything, so we're out there without flashlights. And we see this light on the wood line, and it stays completely level, and it just travels the full length of the field and disappears. And it was white blue, something. It was a very bright color.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember standing there trying to figure out what this could have been, and we were talking out loud, me and my friends, saying, "Okay, well, there's no noise, so it's not a four-wheeler. Wasn't bright enough to be a four-wheeler anyway. It was moving way too fast to have been someone with a flashlight,
Right.
and it stayed too level to have been a flashlight.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
wasn't a firefly, even at a distance, it still would have shown up like yellow, and
Yes.
it didn't blink.
Hmm.
So it stayed solid the entire distance of the field. It wasn't a laser pointer because that was the wrong color. I don't know if you could even get a white or blue laser pointer to go that distance. And even then, you would see it as it travels and hits the tree trunks.
Yeah.
It wouldn't
Yeah.
just like illuminate.
Yeah.
So that was a really strange one.
So what
And
year was that?
that would have been the 1999-2000 school year because I was a senior in high school.
Okay.
And
Wow.
I believe it was probably, I want to say it was early 2000 because it would have been after winter.
Hmm. I like that.
Yeah. And that area has all kinds of legends. There is actually I have a ghost story from that one too. There's a little old house that we would use there, and like that house is apparently haunted, and I have firsthand experience with that. And there's the story of a witch that used to live in the ruins down the street where we were visiting, and this is all on this property that eventually became a Boy Scout camp,
Huh.
and it is on a very large outcropping of limestone.
Oh.
So all of this starts to tie together. It sounds like something that there might be a little bit more going on in this area.
Yeah. 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 I mean, you've got limestone, you've got uh, a ghost light or whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
And yeah, one of the things about those weird little lights when they're traveling in a straight line, it's either slower than a person
Hmm.
would walk or faster, and they don't bounce because that's the thing about someone holding a light
Right.
is, of course, and when you said it was fast, I was like, I can imagine what it would look like if it was somebody jogging with a flashlight. It
Yeah.
would, it would not be smooth at all.
Well, that's why everyone's first instinct was four-wheeler,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
definitely
Even
was not that.
even they kind of because of course they're touching the earth, and the earth isn't perfectly flat, so they're gonna bounce up and down a little bit.
That never occurred to me.
Yeah, yeah, and plus you'd hear the noise.
Yeah, that's why I ruled it
They're
out so early. There was no
so
sound. So,
loud.
but yeah, if it were out there, even if it were silent, it would still bounce with the contours of the ground.
Yeah, yeah. Whatever you had was something going from point A to point B on its business in the evening, and that's what it was. It
Hmm.
was something moving. My favorite thing that I have found that explains these things, these weird lights, is that they are bioluminescent owls. It's
Okay.
the stupidest thing that I've ever heard in my life, but that they supposedly have some sort of fungus on them
Oh,
that is
sure.
bioluminescent on their feathers, and they're white owls, so that means they're barn owls, and they fly in a straight line and they glow, and yeah, I told that to Josh when I found it, and I sent him the quote from the book, and he was just like, "Oh my god." I'm like, "Yeah."
I remember hearing him laugh about that on another show.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, I was the one who brought the goodness to him. I was like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
One of the best possible real explanations I've heard was, and I don't even remember the name of the documentary I was watching, is bioelectric plasma generated through compression of limestone and quartz.
Yes. Yes.
And it was on some sort of science documentary I was watching, and it was in Scandinavia. I believe it was Norway they were studying this. It was either Norway or Sweden, and there were geologists studying it.
Yeah. Yeah. Hesteland, Norway, is one of the places that they've had geologists and physicists and, all sorts of scientific people with tons of equipment set up, and they catch it and they have spectrography and all of this. And one of the more sensible things has been plasma generated by the movement of quartz and limestone. The problem is they have other things that have been cited. So they have things like they'll have glowing humanoid shapes.
Oh, yeah, that's
yeah. And sometimes the little light guys will kind of follow the scientists to their bunkhouse, where they stay when they're there.
Well, see, that takes us back to the observation and the observation theory. It has to have humans to manifest.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when it has humans to manifest, sometimes it follows them home like a puppy who's lost in the woods. And these things happen. But yeah, Josh and I are going to talk to somebody who's been there doing some of the studies and get some of these stories, because there's so many possible explanations. None as good as the owls, but I find it so fascinating that just about every paranormal thing has something to do with lights.
Yeah.
And that's just amazing to me. So tell me about this ghost story before we go.
I was wondering if you wanted to get to that.
Yeah, so, I did too. I did.
This is an entirely different campout that was going on. So
Ooh.
I was there at the same location in this house. I was supposed to have been camping out in a tent that night, but I ended up getting a migraine. So this very small house had a second-story attic area, and there were a couple old cots and beds in there, and they were covered with plastic like you do for like the 60s and 70s, the plastic covering, right?
Yeah.
So the owner allowed me to go up there and sleep on one of the cots because it was dark and dank, and like he could keep other students from going up there and bothering me because he understood. And I'm up there laying down, and I've got a migraine to a point where I can't quite sleep.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be disturbed. And I hear the door to the attic open. I hear someone walk up the stairs, walk over to the bed, felt someone sit on the edge of the bed, heard the creaking of the plastic, as if they sat down and they were watching me. I was turned away looking in the opposite direction, and I didn't want to be disturbed, so I pretended to be asleep, basically.
Right.
And then they get up. I feel the bed shift again, and I hear them walk down the stairs, but I never hear the door close. And I only realized that part after the fact, because later that night I got up and I went back down to the main area where everybody was camping out and having fun. And I was like, hey, I don't know who checked on me earlier. I was still in a lot of pain. I didn't want to be disturbed. I was awake, but I was just pretending to be asleep. And the owner of the house looked at me and says, I was guarding the door. I wasn't allowing anybody to go up there and check on you. Nobody went up there.
Oh boy. That was not what you needed to hear.
This is a small home too. There was a kitchen, a living room area, and then basically 2 corridors leading from one to the other, and then the stairwell going up to the attic. That was it.
Wow.
And yeah, there's it's not the first time I've had something sit on the side of the bed as if it were checking on me, but that one had the most visceral reaction that I could, I could feel the bed, I could hear the plastic creaking, I heard the footsteps, the door, all of it.
Yeah.
So that was a very concrete encounter.
Yeah. So whatever it was, whether it's always physical or not, was at least partly physical.
Right. And I question whether it was because, like I said, this is not the first time I've had that happen. I question whether it wasn't something that follows me or if it was something that was at the house.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. So is the house haunted or were you haunted?
Probably both.
Yeah, it's generally I think that that's the case.
And it could be another situation where, because of the limestone and the terrain, it allowed whatever was following me to manifest.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I do like the idea that there is energy needed to manifest semi-physical form. Because of course these anomalous lights, until I took a photograph of one, for the longest time I was like, they're mostly probably in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
You know. Because some people can't see them.
Which is so bizarre.
And they can be standing right next to me and I'd be like, it's right there. You know, you can't miss it. It's right there.
And it's not just the lights. It's like that bird that your mother saw and you saw a UFO. Same thing happens with Bigfoot.
Yeah. Some people just cannot see it. So what's happening there?
Yeah.
And then, you know, but once I took photographs of them, you know, I started out with just, you know, holding my iPhone up so I can I see them through the camera?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I would see, oh, I can. And for the longest time, I didn't even, you know, I was like, I'm not going to take a picture of them because whatever it is, I don't want to get pissed off because it's like right up the hill from my house. You know, it's like you don't take creepy pictures of your neighbors because you don't want to upset them. Right. But one night I did actually take a photograph, and what it taught me was, yes, there is light. There is something that is exuding some sort of photons out into the world. The colors are different. So something about the camera does not pick up what my eyes see exactly. So there is probably some sort of either the lens is different or my perception is somehow different. And so it's somewhat telepathically enhanced or something.
Yeah. Well, that comes down to simply there's a different wavelength of light that you're perceiving as opposed to the camera.
Yeah.
Granted, that's a very scientific answer, but
that still makes me think that, okay, so maybe there are people who can perceive different wavelengths of light through some unknown physical mechanism.
Why not? There's people who can hear better than others. Like, I can't hear if there are 3 or more people talking in my vicinity, but I can hear bats.
Yeah.
And not just like they're flapping wings when
they're little voices.
Echolocate, I can hear them.
Yeah. Oh, that we have a story about that in this house. Fox for years has been saying, I hear something in that corner. And it's at our TV room. And it's bats. Yeah. I finally heard them like this year because we turned everything off. And of course, when we did that, they got quiet because, you know, they knew that the noise went away. So, maybe there's a predator here. So we'll be quiet. But then they started talking again. And I did finally very faintly hear it. And the cats could hear it too, you know.
Oh, man.
But for the longest time, Fox was like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you hear it? I'm not crazy. And I'm like, I know you're not crazy, honey. It's not. I said, it probably has to do with the fact that mommy and daddy have old ears. And daddy's been playing loud music for a really long time. So that's probably why we can't hear it. But even Morgana couldn't hear it for a while. And so the kid was just like, why can only I hear it? It's like, it's okay, kid.
I totally understand and I sympathize.
Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah, welcome to my world. Only mine's usually seeing things, not hearing things. And yeah. Poor kid. Well, do you have anything else you want to pop out before we go? Because if we keep going, I'm going to ask you about other things. And yeah.
I'm just going to have to come back.
Yeah. Yeah. You're always welcome, as I say to everybody. I don't think I've ever not said it to anybody, which means I have all good guests.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I still need to interview you about the Hera project.
Yep. You do. You do. So I will get with you then, and you can always come back. I'll see if I can get Morgana too, because she would have a lot of fun with you. She always likes talking with other West Virginians and being like, "Hey, how's it going?"
Perfect.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that's all for this week's episode of the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast. If you have any questions or thoughts about the podcast or would like to come and talk about your experiences of the paranormal, you can contact us at 6djk67@gmail.com. We promise to even answer you, and we are always happy to hear from you. Thank you.